Hi folks, my name is Tom Affolter, and in this tutorial I'm going to introduce you to HTML5 as well as its relationship with Cascading Style Sheets. So first of all, this is not a design class. My role is to teach you HTML and Cascading Style Sheet concepts. I'll by no means cover the vast opportunity offered by Cascading Style Sheets, but by the end of this lecture you should at least understand how to implement CSS and several of the most common styles. You're going to know where to go to research Cascading Style Sheets if you're looking for a particular style. The following class offered in our program, which is Website Design, our CIS 130 class, will take what I cover within this course and then focus on layouts. So for much of its life, HTML was one-stop shopping. I mean by that, it was like Microsoft Word, where when you type a letter out, you embed both the content and the formatting in the same DOC file. Old HTML was focused on both how that document looked as well as how it was formatted. So it was, again, all in one document. But as the internet or how we view web pages changed, developers and employers had to make an expensive choice. Now all of a sudden we're looking at the primary source of content being tablets and iPhones and Android devices, which display web pages much differently than a desktop application does. So again, our problem was, do we write multiple websites, one for each platform, such as a unique website for a desktop app, another one for perhaps a small phone or a cellular phone, if you will, or maybe even a little bit larger iPhone screen? Or maybe do we devise an existing website that does all of those platforms? Either way, there was a cost involved in it because it involved us having to go back in and address a different platform, if you will. So what ended up happening was they decided to go with the latter choice. That is, try to come up with a single website that when you look at that single website, you're going to see the same content, maybe not the same structure, but the same content, whether you're looking at it on a smart device, on a desktop computer, or maybe even one of those tiny cell phones that have a 1" by 1" screen. Now, another problem that we came up with was the browsers themselves. As time went on, you had different browsers like Safari and Chrome and Internet Explorer and Firefox. And even though there were standardizations that were set up, some of them slightly veered off, i.e. being one of those examples that really veered quite a ways off. So developers wanted to come up with a way to say, look, I don't want to have to look at whether I'm developing on a Safari browser or I'm looking at it on a Windows browser. I want them to look exactly the same way, and I want to take the formatting away from the browser and I want to put it back in the control of the developer themselves. And therein lies why we've come up with Cascading Style Sheets. We take the standardization away from the browser and we give it back to the developer. One example I like to bring up is the differences between heading tags. Thus far, when we've worked with heading tags, they all look like this large print. But what you would find out in earlier versions of HTML is heading tags actually had a different size among Safari or among Internet Explorer. You might find that one was a 24 point and another one was a 21 point, which doesn't sound like a big deal unless you're trying to fit it into a certain space and all of a sudden it's too large to fit in or perhaps too small. So, Cascading Style Sheets. With the advent of Cascading Style Sheets, again, as I said, we move that control, or what we call the look and feel, away from the HTML and we put it into another responsibility called the style sheet. And what we're going to find out is how we code HTML and how we're going to code style sheets are totally different. They don't look the same, they don't act the same, but they work really, really well together. So what kind of things might you want to do with a style sheet? Well, you can go back in there and make all perhaps HTML1 tags a 21 or 24 point bold. Get over that problem that we had with standardization among H1 tags. So we can specifically say, I don't care what browser you're on, I always want it to be a 24 point. Or we might want to go back in and set a region's background, maybe just a particular area to a dark gray, and maybe a foreground color white, maybe to make it stand out or be a region of the screen. You've seen websites that do that. Or maybe I might want to go in and override that default Arial font on my entire website and say, you know what, now I want my Segio UI 12-point font to be the default, which means any page that pops up would have that default font. Another example might be rollovers. You might want to take your mouse and roll it over a hypertext link, and as it rolls over that link, you might want to have it really stand out. Maybe have the background turn black and the foreground turn white, if you will. Or another example I'm going to be showing you here shortly is, what if I want to take my ordered lists that I've created before that are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and I want to change them into Roman numerals? I can do that with Cascading Style Sheets. And again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So again, Cascading Style Sheets, not only does it replace what old HTML did, but what we're going to find out is it adds an enormous amount of opportunity onto it that HTML didn't have before. And before I go on, I do want to mention, pardon me, that Cascading Style Sheets is really important along with HTML, but there's going to be another technology that you learn down the road that marries itself both to the HTML and the Cascading Style Sheets, and that's going to be JavaScript. And JavaScript is going to be some code later we cover, and that's going to be in the 114 class, that allows you to embed some programming code into your HTML document so that you can come back in and ask it questions. If I'm running on this resolution of a browser, do this, otherwise do that. Or if the user does this, run this little chunk of code and do that. Or maybe display the time to the screen or something like that. We don't cover the JavaScript in this class, but that is going to be an integral part of what we develop on the HTML side, is marrying our Cascading Style Sheets along with our HTML. So style sheets can be used to control the style of a document without affecting its structure, which basically says is I can have, if I wanted to, a different style sheet for each different platform. I might have a style sheet that says this is a style sheet for a smartphone device, perhaps like an Android or a iPhone. At the same time, I might have another one that says this is what the desktop application is going to look like. The HTML is going to be exactly the same. Perhaps what I might do is embed inside of my HTML document later some JavaScript that says, look, and it has this capability, what am I being looked at on? What is the browser that's currently looking at my HTML? If I'm on an iPhone or an Android, then use this style sheet. Otherwise, use this style sheet. And it'll make a lot more sense to us, again, as we go on here within this lecture. So the style of a document consists of the elements such as the color, the fonts, the positions, what it really looks like, the non-text stuff. If you're to strip out all the look and feel from a document, an HTML document, all you would have is text. That's it. So the style refers to that look and feel, the pizzazz to a web page, whereas the structure refers to the formatting or the layout of the page with just the paragraphs and the information that exists within inside of that. Again, I got a little bit ahead of myself here, but this is talking about dynamics cascading style sheets, and that's that concept that we use where we marry the JavaScript along with our CSS. And here's some pseudocode example on the screen here. And remember, pseudocode's not programming code, it just explains to you the process. So if you're running on a desktop, then run the desktop cascading style sheets. Otherwise, if you're on a tablet, do the tablet style sheet. Otherwise, do a mobile style sheet. And that would be an example of where we might want to embed some JavaScript down the road, but certainly not in this class, but it is a discussion. So I guess if you're going to simply put what the purpose of cascading style sheets is to allow you to modify the characteristics of a particular tag or create a new custom version of an existing tag. And it's not just an existing tag. It could be tags or regions. You're going to find out that there's so much more that we can do with that. There are three different ways that we can implement cascading style sheets into our HTML document. The first method that we're going to talk about, and the one that we're probably going to look at quite a bit, but not want to use much later, is the inline style sheet. And the inline style sheet basically says that if I'm going to use this heading 1 tag, I'm going to put it right at that spot where I want that heading 1 tag to be used. If I want, I can go back in and say this specific paragraph is going to be a certain font. So we use it at the spot in the HTML that we want it. It doesn't really follow that general concept of the purpose of why we have cascading style sheets, although there is a place for it, and we'll talk about that. The other method that we're going to take a look at are the embedded style sheets. Now, whereas the inline style is put specifically in the HTML document, we would say that that's not reusable. We'll talk about that in a minute. I mean, if I put it on my first H1 tag and say this first H1 tag is going to be of a certain font, it doesn't impact any of the other H1 in my document. It just impacts it that one spot. Kind of like the old HTML did it when you went to the spot where you want it to happen. It doesn't make it reusable. Now, embedded style sheets say that I'm going to put it in the same HTML document. So I'm going to identify my styles and say these are the styles up generally at the top of my document, and anything in that document then will be impacted by that style sheet. The challenge with it, though, is it's only going to impact that one page and not my entire website. If I want to create a style sheet, though, that's going to be my look and my feel for my entire website, I'm going to write that as what's called an external or a link style sheet. And we're going to look at all these here in a second, which means I'm going to store it outside of my HTML, and when my HTML opens up, I'm going to say, go out and grab this style sheet and use it. And the beauty behind that is it makes it reusable. That means that if I've got 20 different HTML documents or web pages, they can all point to that same common look and feel. And the moment I go back to that one style and I make one little tweak to it, it affects all my other pages, so I don't have to go back in and change them individually as I would if I was using an embedded style sheet. So the star that we see on this page right here, what it implies is that is really our ultimate goal, is to try to push for linked styles. We want to put everything outside the document we can. But if you know for a fact that you're going to put a style on a page and only on that one page, and you never want to reuse it again, then you're probably going to do it as an embedded style or an inline style. We're going to try to avoid inline styles as much as possible, because that goes back and violates that whole concept of HTML5, where we want to separate that look and that feel. And besides that, they're not reusable. So let's take a look at an example that I have out here, and I call it Style Demo. You should have examples of all these HTML document samples that I'm going to pull open. So if you'd like to, I would suggest as we go along that you pause my lectures and you take a look at these documents a little bit, or you follow along with what I'm doing here. So what I've done, I clicked this bottom link here and pointed it to the folder that had all of my HTML documents in it. Now remember, the definition of a website would be basically a folder that points to your home web page or where you have all your HTML documents located, and that's exactly what I did here. I just simply clicked down here, I opened a folder, and I pointed to the folder that had my examples in it, which includes all my graphics, as you see here, and my HTML documents. So what I'm looking for here is Style Demo. So let's take a look at where I'm going to find Style Demo here. It's going to be down the list here, Style Demo, right here. So I'm going to open it up. We had an example open up before. That was just the first document in order. Now, take a look at what I've got here. I'm going to give you an example of all of those three methods, and then we're going to go back in and we're going to implement them ourselves. So the first thing I want to take a look at is, let's see if I've got an inline style in here, and here's an inline style right here. Okay, and the way this reads, and we're going to cover these styles again, is if you're doing inline, you always include the keyword style, and then after the keyword style you have equal, and within quotation marks you put your CSS definition in here. So what this CSS definition says is this and only this H1 tag here should be centered. So let's go ahead and open this up as long as I've got it here. and take a look at what this document's going to look like. So right off the bat, notice that I embedded this H1 tag right here. And as I highlight it, notice one nice thing that Blend does is it highlights that region that I'm dealing with on the screen, and this is actually centered here. If I was to take my document and open it up, you'll see that it just remains centered. And if I get too small, it will wrap it around. Okay, so let me get back over where I need to be here, so we can see everything on the screen. So that's an example of inline. It's used only at that spot. If I wanted it to impact one of my other heading tags, then what I'd have to do is go back in and add it at each one of those locations. And I could very easily do that. Watch this. So I've got an H2 down here, which represents Amendment 1. Notice again how it's red. We'll come back and take a look at that in just a second here. But if I wanted that heading to be centered and I wanted to do it inline, then I could simply grab that code right there, copy it, and paste it right there. And voila, it centered it immediately. So there is an example right there. I'm going to go ahead and take that out. And let's clean that up just a little tiny bit. And that was an example of inline. We're going to look at a lot of different inline samples here as time goes on. Let's go ahead and take a look at what an embedded style would look like. So right here is my embedded style. That means that at this point what I've done is I've created what's called a class. We're going to talk about it in a minute, called setRed. And anytime I want to implement that class, I can do that down below. And I've done a setRed somewhere in here. It looks like I've done it externally. Let's take a look here and see how I might make this work. Do I not have a setRed in here? Let's do a control find, setRed. And do I have any in here? I do not. Okay, so let's make one happen. So what I want to do right here is on this, well, heading Amendment 1 is already, that is already red, so let me see what else I can do. Let's take this heading here at the top, this guy right here that is centered. Okay, and what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and take the centering off of it just to demonstrate one at a time. And now I want to use what's called a class. So I'm going to do class equals setRed. And notice the moment that I did that, it turned that heading to red. And in fact, if I wanted to go back in, we're going to talk about it in a minute, I can make all headings red, as we see here. I can do whatever I want. In fact, somewhere in here, I did have a setRed. We're going to talk about a span tag in a minute, but notice what I did is I just noticed when I was looking at my code in here that this P right here is red. So notice what I did is I created a span tag. We're going to talk about span in a minute. I surrounded just the P that I wanted to be red. I turned the span on, I applied setRed to it, and then I turned the span off, which turned off the red. If I wanted to expand that out, I could have moved that span tag across. Let's cut that span tag right here, move it over to here, and now all of a sudden I have P and element red. Okay. Again, we're going to look at the different styles. The whole focus right now is the fact that by me changing this here, I'm impacting stuff down below. Let me just give you one more example of how I might want to do it. I've got a lot of heading 2s in here right now. And I've got some of these, I've got paragraphs in here. What I'd like to do is maybe make every paragraph green. Okay, so what I could do here is I'm going to take the P, and we'll talk about how I'm implementing this in just a moment, but I want every paragraph tag, not just some, every paragraph tag to have a color of, and notice I get IntelliSense here, green. Okay, and oops, it didn't type out the whole green. And I close it out with a semicolon at the end of the property, which is in a lot of cases optional. And notice what happened. As soon as I did that, anything that's within a P tag automatically inherited that green color. right there. Now let's go on and step over one more thing here. I want to show you this external style sheet right here. So what this is doing, again we're going to cover how this is implemented in a minute, is we are implementing now a external style that is called MyStyleSheet.css. All that really is this information right here. If I cut that information out and pasted it into a standalone file, just a standard text file, and I named it MyStyleSheet.css, and then I referenced it just like I did here, every web page automatically would have P be my P tags would automatically be green. Let me take this out for right now. And what I want to do is I want to go back in and I want to open up this style sheet, MyStyleSheet.css. So let's look down in here and see where it's at. MyStyleSheet.css right here. Okay, I'm going to click on it. Notice what this guy is saying now. I don't have an opening style here, a top and bottom. It doesn't need that. I do have a comment. So it's showing you here that this is the method. If I wanted to add a particular comment to a style, I could do that. But what it's doing is it's saying every heading 2 now that this style sheet's attached to will now automatically be red. Notice that nowhere in my HTML document I had a minute ago, whether it was inline or embedded, did it have the headings become red, and that's exactly what happened right here, is it told to. Now the other one I did here is I told it, which you may not have noticed, is I wanted every paragraph tag to be centered. Okay, maybe I don't want those paragraph tags to be centered. I could take that line out and they would automatically push to the left. So thus far, let's go back now and take a look at the amendments. What was that page here? Let's go back in and double check. That was Style Demo. So let's jump back to Style Demo here and just review. And we'll go back and we're going to look at each one individually. What I did, and notice that it's within the head of the document right here. So within the head of the document, I added either a link to an external file sheet that told it implement any of those styles and bring it into this document, or I made it for this document only right here, okay, or I did it inline. So let's continue with this lecture and take a look at some more. So let's begin talking about the formatting of Cascading Style Sheets, and right now we'll just take a look at the embedded and the external. How we do inline styles are a little bit different, although the style sheet themselves, the style we implement, is the same thing. It's how we put it within the HTML document that differs. So the way the Cascading Style Sheets initially is set up is we start off by identifying the element that we want to change. For example, on this slide here, element might be heading 2. And style 1 might be I want the background color to be yellow, and style 2 might be I want the foreground color to be red. Now notice how it's laid out here. We start off with the element, and then we have an opening bracket, and then we have a closing bracket down below, and the style that we're going to implement to whatever element turns out to be will be included between those brackets. Now also notice that at the end of each one of the styles, we put a semicolon in there to close that style out, to tell it that there's another style coming. Although you can get away without putting a semicolon at the very last style, not closing it out, it's good practice to try to remember to always put that semicolon within the document. We'll take a look at some more examples on this. Embedded styles are going to be, as you see right here, within the top of your document, within the head of your document, you're going to identify the particular style. The way you're going to do that and tell it within the head of your document it is a style is you're going to have an opening style tag and you're going to have a closing style tag, and anything in between that will be your style implementation. And as long as I'm talking about that, let me go back in and discuss a little bit about the carriage returns that you see here. Some of my examples, I'm going to have my style straight out in one line. Most generally that's if it's a single style being applied. Other times you're going to see that I lay it up and down just like you see right here, and it just depends on the implementation, and it also depends whether or not I was the originally one that created it or not. It doesn't matter. White space, just like in HTML, is going to be ignored. So I could take element, bracket, and put all of this across on one line should I choose to do that. But from a readability standpoint, when you're embedding it in a style tag or in an external style, you're going to find out that doing it this way is probably the better way, and a lot of document programs that you're going to utilize will automatically format it this way for you. So they're going to force formatting from a readability standpoint, just like you might find now that some of the HTML documents, when you create them, depending on the editor that you're using, will also force some kind of formatting, or at least give you the option to go back in and reformat it if you wanted to. Now, if you're doing an external style, let's take a look at the two of these. Notice that the embedded style says that that's going to be in the HTML document, so we're going to put it between style tags. The external style is going to be in its own document. There's not going to be an opening tag, and there's not going to be a closing tag on it. They're simply going, a closing and opening style tag. It's simply going to define each one of the styles individually in this respective text document. And again, the same thing holds true here. You don't have to have it laid out like you see it in the slide, but from a readability standpoint, as you're going to see, it makes a lot more sense. So let's take a look now at some specific examples of these different style implementations. And the example that we're seeing on the screen right here is going to be an inline style. That means that only the H2 that we're putting this on will be impacted. It's not going to have any impact anywhere else within the document. And what this particular style is doing is it's telling it that the color of the text, Amendment 1 in this case, will be displayed in a red color. Now, how do we do and implement inline style? We're going to use the opening style equals tag. So we'll say style is equal, and then within quotation marks, we're going to put the style that we had. Now, in this particular case, it's probably a good idea not to layer it like we did before. When I said layer it, I'm saying something like this. It's probably a better idea if we're going to do inline styles to just put it straight across. Although the fact of the matter is, folks, if you're really going to be a serious HTML developer, you probably don't want to do any of this. If you need to do this, I will show you some ways to do it later, either externally or embedded, if you need to do it once. Although I would agree that if you know that you're only going to do this in one place and in only one document, I wouldn't put it external. Why would you put, if you've got 50 pages that you're working on, why would you put a style in there that's only going to be used in one of those 50 pages? You're probably better off putting that not inline, but embedded at the top of the document. And again, the problem of this is, too, as I mentioned, it doesn't take advantage of the reusability. It affects only this H2 tag, and that tag only. So again, here's an example of how it would be laid out using what I just described. You start off with the particular tag that you want to modify. You're going to put the keyword style equals, and then within there you're going to apply your property and the value, and you're going to separate those with semicolons. And it's a good idea at the very last property to put a semicolon in and close it out. So this example that we have down below here says on this P tag, this paragraph, I want the text color of this paragraph, anything that's represented by these three dots, to be a color blue. This guy down below here says I've got a heading 1 tag, and what I want to do is only this heading 1 tag. And notice what I'm doing here is I'm changing the font on this. I'm saying I want the font now to be an Arial font. Now Arial, by the way, is the default font. So I really don't have to tell it that, unless at the top of the document I might have a embedded or an external style that defaults perhaps to a different font. Maybe I want my entire website to be a default Seggio, but I want this one H1 here to be of an Arial font. This would override that. We're going to talk about that in a second. Let's take a look at an implementation of CSS Inline here. So let's go back over to our examples here and find CSS Inline, and here we go. And let's open up that browser window as well here. And right here at the very top, you're going to see an example of an inline style. And what this inline style is telling it is only this H1 paragraph, the H1 only, do I want it to be centered. And you notice when I highlight that it shows me right here that that's the element that I have selected. So it's not going to impact any other H1 that might be in my document. It's only going to implement this one. And if I wanted to put an additional style on it, look down here. I did it with color red. So this guy turned this amendment right here, this text, into red text. And I'm using the color property to change it into red. And we're going to go through a little bit more of these as time goes on. Don't expect to remember all of them, but you should remember some of them. Okay. Now, if I want to do a little bit more and apply a little bit more style to this, I could do something like this. If I want that text to be green, I'll come right up here and I'll implement the same color property, and they don't have to be in any respective order at this point. So I'm going to do color, and I could do perhaps green here. Close the semicolon out, and notice immediately it turned it up here into a green text. And we'll find there's a variety of different things we can do with it. This is just the tip of the iceberg here. Let's jump back to our slides and continue on here. Let's talk a little bit about the embedded styles. So embedded styles impact only that one HTML document they're sitting on, but if I want within that style, I can embed a whole bunch of different tags. It's going to affect that entire web page, but not my entire website. And how I implement it is at the very top of the document, I'm going to put in a style tag and a closing style tag. Now notice that I have type equals text/CSS. Might be a good idea to use it, but what we're going to find out is HTML5 will allow you just to simply open up a style tag and a closing style tag down below. So it's the default. It can be excluded here. Let's take a look at CSS embedded here. Let's get to my code here. And let's jump back down to CSS embedded. Now, notice at the very top of this document, well, that's kind of pukey looking over here, but at the very top of the document, what I did is I added in a particular style tag here. And in this particular case, I added in text CSS. And I got a comment here, so it shows you how I can add comments in and how to do a CSS comment, a whack star and a star whack. That should look familiar for the people introduction to programming. And then notice I've got an H1 here, and I'm saying on this H1 I want the H1 to automatically be centered, and notice it's going to affect every H1 that exists on my page. And down below here I say I want my paragraph now to have a color of red, and notice here's a new property. Probably shouldn't put a space here. Notice this new property is background hyphen color. So that's going to change the background of whatever tag is implemented here. Whatever tag. Now it's kind of interesting how that works, right? And every paragraph tag that exists, every paragraph tag as you see down below here, where's my next paragraph right here, is going to be a red color on a yellow background. And if I wanted to, I could even go further than that. Look at this. Let's go back into this one, and let's say I want to impact the entire web page. I want my body now to be, by default, maybe I want my body to be let's do a color. And what color do we want to pick here as far as a color that we can pop up for the entire page that's going to stand out? Chartreuse. Watch this. Automatically then, when I did that, it impacted the entire body. Now, it's important, we're going to talk about inheritance in a minute, because the entire web page then had a background color of chartreuse by default. But what I did is I overrode the paragraph color here down below and said, you know what? Paragraphs, though, within that same body will have a background color of yellow. We're going to talk about inheritance and how that works in a minute, because we're going to take that, we're going to harness that to our advantage in a little bit. So let's jump back over to the slides here. Hopefully this aspect makes sense. Okay, now what we want to talk about are linked or external style sheets, and this is where you want to do the vast majority of your work. And this is very, very crucial to you as a developer, because what a lot of developers are going to do is they're going to go out there and they're going to build their own style sheet, their own look and their own feel. That's about 75% of web development right there, folks. If you can build that 75% that's a common look and feel, you can use that among different clients. You don't have to use it just on one client. You can jump over to a different client, use that same common look and feel, and perhaps just change a couple common colors, maybe a couple fonts, and that follows you along. It makes development a lot quicker for you, and that's one of the goals that you're going to work towards, is that common look and feel that you're going to use, as well as I'm going to show you some other tools that will be available for us for common look and feels towards the end of this particular lecture. So what we're taking a look at right here, folks, on the screen is how we link a common style sheet. And we're going to use the link tag. There's two different ways to do it. We can use a link tag and do a link href equals, and this is a standalone tag that we're going to put in our head, and this does everything right here. A second method that we could use if we wanted to is perhaps we have a style tag already in this. We have an embedded style sheet that's on this particular page. I can, if I wanted to, go back in there and use an @import statement right here and do the same thing. I'm going to import the stylesheet.css. Now before I go on, we're assuming now that this stylesheet.css is in exactly the same folder as the HTML document right here that we're implementing. Oftentimes we're going to create a folder in our HTML document. We're going to call it CSS, or we'll call it styles, and put it in there. If that was the case, right before this stylesheet.css, pardon me, I'd have to go back in and put the path into it. So if it was in a folder called CSS, I would do a CSS/style sheets. But let's go back in and take a look at the implementation. Obviously, this star here tells you that if you're going to do this, this top method is by far the better method to use. I've always had problematic issues with using it this way down below. But it does have an impact a little bit on inheritance on it. That means that any style that might be prior to this might have an impact depending upon when the style sheet is brought in. And when I'm talking about, I'm saying if right below this style I had gone back in and I had said something like, I want all H1s to be green, and then the imported style sheet changed it to blue, it would become blue. It would override that first example that we have up above. No different than if I put this style here and it said make it green, and underneath it I then said, oh, by the way, make all H1s blue, it would override this guy right here, the last one that it saw. But we'll talk a little bit more about those in a second. Let's go back in and take a look at, we saw the style sheet, but let's go back and play with it. Look at the CSX external style example that I have over here. So CSX external style right here, and notice at the top of this document what I did is I imported right here this style sheet, my stylesheet.css. Let's go ahead and take a look at that web page as it opens up here. Oh, where's it at? Did I close it out? No, I did not. There it is. And we'll see right off the bat that there are no styles anywhere in here, but my text automatically, this paragraph appears to be centered, and these amendments within this document right here already are in red. Nowhere in here does it tell it that we can see visually that it should be red, so it's telling me that it's probably within my style sheet. And by the way, this is an old way of doing it. I do not need to close it out. That can be taken out. As well as I believe right now we can eliminate this relationship type tag here that tells it it's going to be a style sheet. It would still work. I'm an old dog, so you'll see most of my examples will still have that in there. So let's take a look at that style sheet. My stylesheet.css. It's in the same folder. So where is it at here? My stylesheet.css. And notice what it's doing in here. I'm telling it, I didn't notice that every paragraph in here is centered. If I take that paragraph tag out, or I comment it out, so let's comment it out. Let's do a /* here and do a */ over here, and then I go back into my external external style sheet document that we're working on in here. It didn't update it right away. I would have expected it to update it right away. So let's go back to that style sheet here, because the paragraphs are still centered, which means then that I actually physically have to go back in, and I'm going to save that document right there. And then let's go back over to the style sheet and see if we notice any changes. Didn't implement the changes right off the bat. Let me just double check here and see if I did this right. The paragraphs are still centered. So I'm thinking I might have to resync this guy again. So let's try that. Let's resync it. Close the old version out and see what we come up with. There you go. Notice how everything now is pressed to the left by default. It's left aligned in here. So you saw how that style sheet. Interesting that the style sheet changes aren't immediate the same way that HTML changes are. And I'll bet you inline and embedded will be immediate, whereas the external style sheets aren't. I had to go back in, you saw, and resave it. Let's look at that style sheet one more time here and just prove a couple of things. We've got the color red here. Let's say that I wanted to go back in and change all my H2s to a green color. Okay, hit the save button. We found that we had to save it. Okay, let's jump back over now into our original document. Okay, and let's refresh this guy. Reload him again. Hello. There we go. Should be green. There we go. Green. These are short examples. We're going to dive in a little bit deeper here in a couple of minutes. But let's jump back over now and take a look at, continue with our slides just a little bit. So again, you have to rationalize what you really want to do and whether or not you want to do it in embedded or external style sheet. So if you want all H1 tags, for example, in the current document, just the current document affected, but nothing outside of that current document, then you're going to embed it within a style tag and you're going to put it in that document only. If you want all H1 tags to be affected throughout all your website or all your look and feel, then you're going to want to implement it in an external style sheet. Now, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to use inline, but I will suspect that later when you get into your 130 class, you're going to be told not to do anything inline, that you're always, if you need it in that document, you're going to want to do it embedded. And we're going to take a look at how we could go that route here in just a couple of minutes. So, again, as of right now, you should understand why we use Cascading Style Sheets. You know that that's going to provide that look, that color, that pizzazz to your web page. And you better be aware at this point the three methods of implementing Cascading Style Sheets. Boy, the advantages of and the disadvantages of all three. The disadvantage, I really never talked about the external style, but if that link is lost to that external style, if you fat finger it, immediately your entire web page is going to look terrible. You're not going to have any styles in it. That is a disadvantage, but not a major one. I'm not sure if there's a major disadvantage to external style sheets, but there may be. In the next couple of slides, what we're going to take a look at now is, now that we understand what the style sheets are, let's look at what we can do with these styles a little bit. Again, remember, I'm not here to teach you how to create pretty web pages. In fact, probably some of the web pages that you're going to turn into me are going to be horrendous, but that's not the purpose of this class. The purpose is to learn what you can do with it. Later, we're going to learn how to do it. Let's go ahead and continue getting to know CSS a bit. First thing I want to talk about as we continue is the rules of precedence. We now understand that we have three different types of implementation for style sheets. We know that we can do it inline, we know we can embed it on the page that only interacts with that page, and we know that we can have an external style sheet which provides a look and feel for our entire site. There is what's referred to as a normal order of precedence. And the normal order of precedence says is that the inline style, that style that you put right at that spot, takes precedence over all other definitions. Then after that, an embedded style sheet will take precedence over an external style sheet. And then the last precedence obviously is that external style sheet. Now it's important to understand that concept of inheritance. A moment ago when I changed that body tag color to green, every tag between the body tags inherited that green text. I could override that green text by adding a style to the element. If I have an H1 red, it would override that green element. So again, inline, if I had made a particular color red, it would have overridden any other setting that we had before. So again, that CSS has an order of precedence. In an external style sheet, color red and an Arial font, or let me back up here. If I have an external style sheet and I set the body tag to become a red font with an Arial type, okay, and I do that again in an external style sheet, and then in an embedded style sheet, I go back in and I change the font to Seggio, it's still going to retain that original color red that it got from the body. It's going to inherit that, but it's going to override that Arial font and turn it into Seggio just for that region. In this case, if I put it on the body tag, I'd override the original. Now let's simplify this just a little bit. In reality, Cascading Style Sheet precedence is based on the last style seen. So normally when you code the first thing is you apply your external style. Then if you choose to, you're going to have an embedded style. That will be the next thing that it reads. So that embedded style will override anything that it sees in the external style sheet. And then if you put anything in line at that point, then that's the last thing that it sees. So let's take a look at some examples here at CSSPrecedence.html. So give me a second here to pull that up. And I've got CSSPrecedence.html here. So notice in here I've done a couple of different things. Normally I would want to put a link in here and use that link statement to call up my, my style sheet. But what I chose to do is this time I embedded a different kind of call for it. So this statement is what calls the external style sheet within the style tag. And remember, this material right here is optional. You don't have to put that in there any longer with HTML5, but you'll see that around. Now, in this particular case, what's going to happen is it's going to go out there reading top to bottom. It's going to see this @import statement. It's going to go out there and grab all the styles out of that mystylesheet.css. Let's take a look at what that is right here. So my style sheet goes in here, and let me take this out. I think I'd like that P tag to still be centered. Let me save this just to make sure. Okay, so what this style sheet says is all paragraph tags are going to be centered by default. Any P tag will automatically have its text centered. We'll talk a little bit more about these tags here in a couple of minutes. And then it says that every H2 is going to have a color of green. So from that point on, the moment that it encounters, let's go back to that previous page here, and that was CSS precedence. So the moment that it encounters this guy right here, it's going to set, for example, that green font color. Right here now, the next line down says make all H2s, I think this is a gray color. See, this is a hexadecimal color. And again, we're going to talk about colors here in a minute. It's going to make all H2s a gray color. Let's take a look at that and see what it's doing here. Let's try that again. There we go. Oh, I hit it twice. So notice how these H2s right here are gray. But if you look here, notice I've got one green amendment 2 here. So let's find amendment 2. Notice right here what I did is at this point, when it encountered this H2 right here, it knew that the color for H2s was going to be green. But because the last thing it sees is this color green, anything in between these tags now will be green, and it inherits that. But when this tag is over, it doesn't switch all H2s to green. This next H2 down here will revert back to the gray. So it's only impacting that one style here. Now, it is a fact, folks, that what I could do here is I could change that order. If I took this import statement right here out and I put it underneath here, now what's going to happen, and this is not the way to do it, folks, this is not standard, is the first thing it's going to do reading top to bottom is it's going to set H2. If inside of this URL, this style sheet here, I change the color of the H2 perhaps to green, okay, or to blue, it would override that initial color because this is the first thing that it sees and this is the second thing that it sees. But look, if you think about this rationally, you'd never want to do that. Why would you override a style in an embedded sheet? You would never override it. You would have no reason to do that. You only want to put styles in the embedded sheet that apply to that page alone. So you want to take advantage of that inheritance. You would never want to do this. There's no reason for it because it would make this line pretty much useless if it's being overwritten, and why would you even add this line to begin with? So let's get this back the way it was before. And even then, I wouldn't do it this way. I would use that link statement that we took a look at earlier to go back in and apply my external style sheet. And that link statement as well could go down underneath the style. I could put it anywhere within the head, and it would read this first, and then the external style would override it. But you don't want to do it that way. There's no reason for that. It makes no sense whatsoever. You want to only override the external style sheet. So let's go ahead and continue on. We understand the basics behind the styles. Now, inheritance. Let's just real briefly talk about the inheritance aspect of it that I was just getting at, just to make things a little bit clearer. So the way that inheritance works is, I told you earlier in the class that every tag has a is a child tag of the HTML tag. Everything falls under HTML, and then HTML has two subtags, a head tag and a body tag. The head tag has a title in it. It might also have meta tag information in it. The body tag could be made up of anything. Now, I'm just giving you some examples here. The body tag might be made up of what we'll talk about here, divs and spans and headers and footers, or there may be paragraphs or heading 1s or heading 6 tags and ordered lists or unordered lists. And then underneath those tags, we now have other tags, like an LI tag underneath the OL. And maybe inside that LI tag, we have an EM tag, which is emphasis, which we'll talk about again in a second. Or under the paragraph tag, we may have hypertext links. We may have another EM tag, strong tags. And basically what it says is if I change this body tag right here, anything underneath it will inherit whatever I make. So if I said this body tag is going to have background color yellow, foreground color red, automatically everything is going to have that. They're going to inherit it. But I can't overwrite it. So if I came down to this P and I've got that background yellow, foreground red, and I said this P tag now is going to have a background of white and a foreground of black, everything underneath that now will inherit that tag unless I do it inline. If I do this inline, it won't impact these guys down below. Inline. But assuming that I'm using external or embedded, that's where the inheritance comes in. So keep that in mind when you're applying styles, is that everything downline or subtags are going to inherit whatever style I put on the parent itself, and we're going to see some examples of that in a couple of minutes. So you can use the following example that I have in this slide here to apply styles to a specific tag. So in this particular case, notice what I'm doing here is I'm putting an OL, an LI, and a strong tag in here, and I'm saying the background color is going to be yellow and the color is red. Now, the way this reads, this is an interesting statement here. What it says is the only tags that I want to apply is a strong tag that's used inside of an LI tag that is inside of an ordered list. So any other strong tag that I have anywhere in my document will not have any impact at all. But the moment that this strong tag right here, or this CSS is applied, and this example here would be an external or an embedded example, only the strong inside that list will be impacted. So there's an example of different types of inheritance. It says if the strong tag was inherited by the LI tag, which was inherited by the OL tag, only make that one background color yellow, foreground color red. Now, we'll talk about that strong tag a little bit later. The strong tag basically is a bold tag right now. If I want to make something bold, I can surround it with a strong on and a strong off. There's some advantages and disadvantages about that, and we'll take a look at that a little bit. Let's take a look at this inherited tag example. Okay, so inherited tags right here. Okay. So in this one, I've got the normal style sheet link in here. So what I've got is I've got a link. I'm telling it's a style sheet. I can actually get away and not put most of the stuff in. It would work. But I'm telling it specifically the external style I want to have applied is going to be amendments.css in here. Okay. Then down below here, let's see what I've got. I've got a embedded style here, and notice what I say is that if I've got an A tag that's used inside of a heading 2 tag, which is also inside of a DT and a DL. And by the way, if I haven't explained it yet, these are called definition lists. Let me just take a brief moment and talk about what a definition list is here, because I know we've been looking at it. We really haven't played with these too much. I hope I've already covered that in a previous lecture, but if not, let's just take a look at it real quickly here again. So if I look at this output here, definition lists really, they violate that separation of responsibilities here. And what this definition list does is it says that that you start with a definition list, and then notice that in here, the entire tag should be separated with a definition list. And inside this definition, I have a definition term. So this whole thing in here is a giant definition list. And right here, this is a definition term. We're going to talk about why that's turning red later. That's a demonstration here in a couple of minutes. But what it does is it causes the very first definition here. In this case, let's forget the fact that I've got all this extra tag in here. We just got a DT in here with amendments 1. It causes that to be to the left, but then when I put a DD in here, it embeds it and indents the left-hand side. So I've got a definition. This would be the example of the DT, definition term, and underneath here I have a definition list. Technically, this is in the same family of code as the list that we did before, the OL and the UL, but the fact of the matter is it doesn't function at all like an OL or a DL. But let's back up here now and take a look at what's happening. So in here I have a definition list, and that's what the style up here at the top looks for. And it says find a DT in the middle of it. So here's another DT. Okay, and inside that DT, is there an H2? There is an H2, and it says if you find an A tag here, an A tag, okay, then what you're to do is make that a color green, and that's exactly what it did. DT, excuse me, a DL, there's a DT inside of it, there's an H2, and inside that H2 is an A right there. And the moment that it sees that A tag, it's going to convert that to an A, and actually what that is a that's going to be a rollover, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes here. And I noticed there's a mistake down in this page. See how this color coding does really well. It tells me that right there there's a quotation mark that's missing, but notice that my code allowed it. Future browsers won't. That was that error correction and detection that allowed that page to work. I'm going to go ahead and save this to make sure I don't forget it. And let's go back in and just prove before I go on that I'm not changing all the A tags. Okay? If I come down here and let's say right in between here, I do an A tag. href equals scc.spokane.edu. Okay, so there's my hypertext link, except I better put my http:// in front of it. Okay, and then I'm going to put SCC as my link text and /a at the end of it. Okay, and then let's click outside of it. And how come it didn't refresh me? Where am I at here? It didn't refresh my code, so let's close this out and let's rerun live view again. And look what it did here. It put my hypertext link from that code that I just added in here, but it's not green. And why is it? Because it's an A tag that is not embedded in that same range of tags that I had earlier. So this is a nice way where you can focus in on a specific tag or the specific use of a tag if you choose to go that route. Let's talk a little bit about contextual selectors. One of the problems of inheritance is that when I put a tag in like you see on the screen here, an H1 color red, what it's doing is it's impacting all H1s. This is kind of related to that slide I just showed you a minute ago. But this one impacts all H1s. So down below here, using the same contextual selector that we just talked about, this B, which is probably not the best example because the B tag is an old bold tag, but it will work in this example. I wouldn't use a B tag. In fact, what I should have is that should be saying strong rather than B, because the B tag has been deprecated, but it will still work. So what it's saying is the only time I want that B tag to be blue is when it's inside of a list, an LI tag. So let's take a look at contextual selectors. This is very closely related to that one example that I just brought up. So let me close the example we were just looking at out. Okay, and let's look at contextual selectors here. And notice what I've got here. I've got a very simple page. And in this page, I've got an embedded style here that says, I want, and here's a really good example. It says, I want LIs right here to be a color, whatever 808080 is. We highlight it, and it looks to be some kind of a gray. And by the way, your notepad won't show you this. This is only something that brackets is going to show me when I highlight it. No different, I think, than I do red. Yeah, it shows me the red color. That's because the editor lets me do that. But again, notice that I'm turning all LIs into that gray color, but I'm telling it if there's a strong tag, and I'm glad I used it correctly here. I got rid of the B tag that was in a slide, and I'm using strong. If there is a strong tag that's being used, then I want that strong tag to be red text. Basically, what I'm doing here, folks, is I'm overriding that bold aspect of it, and I'm saying right now I want strong inside of an LI tag to be simply red. So now notice down here in my code, I've got my LIs in here, so I would expect all those LIs to be that gray color. But right here, I've got the 2001 champion Mariners, and I've taken that strong tag and I've surrounded the 2001 champion. But it's a strong used in an LI. Strong up here used in an LI. So it's going to change what strong does. It's going to override that bold aspect of strong, and it's going to change it into a red color. Okay, so let's prove that. Clicked it twice, didn't need to do that, and here you go. So there's the gray color that we had from the LI, and then notice here that I've got 2001 champions. Oh, don't know what that means. Live preview is not maintaining a link is what it's telling me back and forth. Now, before I go on, notice what I did up here at the top. I used the bold tag. Let's take that out and let's put strong in there if we're going to be consistent here. Okay, strong. Now notice, let's just prove that this is updating here, the live update. Notice how the strong now comes back in as bold. Right here. So that's its normal way it presents text as strong. And that's used not inside of an LI tag, so it had no impact on it. I could change, if I wanted to change that strong tag by itself, I could go back in there and do something like this. I could do strong, and I want, maybe I want strong to become green. I better put color green here. Color green, semicolon. And click outside of it, and I didn't close that guy out right here. I need to close him out. That was a mistake. Let's line this back up again. And I see my live update isn't working. So let's go ahead and re-update again. And there's the green. So I can make any tag do whatever I want to do at any point in time. In fact, I can make a strong tag no longer be strong. I can make a strong tag be a bold in a certain color. In fact, later we're going to find out that I can decide how strong is. I can have a light bold, I can have a really dark bold if I want. So that's the whole idea. Tags have certain meanings, but I can make those tags do whatever I want to do in Cascading Style Sheets. And in fact, you'll see right here, I have this as an ordered list. I can actually, and I don't want to do that, but I can make an ordered list act just like an unordered list if I wanted to. But that's outside the scope of what we're doing right now, so let's just jump back over and continue. Now, what if you want to change the style of more than one tag at once? Say that I want all the paragraphs, I want the heading 2 through the heading 4 to all show up as italics. Do I have to do them separately? And the answer is no. Whereas a space in between these says is in, the H4 is in, is in H3. The comma between it just says, look, these are separate tags and apply them separately. So make the P tag font italic, make the H2 font style italic, etc. down the line. So they're all seen individually. It's just a shortcut. But don't confuse this with the embedded where the is in method, which is a space instead of a comma.